Chapter 1. Silas stood on the edge of the makeshift cemetery, his boots sinking slightly into the damp earth. Rows of freshly turned graves stretched before him, a silent testament to the battle they had barely survived. Too many of them. He should have saved more. The air was thick with soil and sorrow, heavier than the smoke had been. Mothers clutched their children, whispering reassurances they barely believed. Fathers held hats against their chests, faces carved from grief. The elderly knelt in silent prayer, their whispers carried away by the autumn wind. A group of villagers worked methodically, digging yet another grave. Their movements were slow, weary, and deliberate, as if each shovelful of dirt carried the weight of the dead with it. Sweat glistened on their brows despite the cool breeze. A wooden cross was carefully planted at the head of each mound, the names etched into the wood with trembling hands. "We'll need more crosses," a grizzled man muttered, voice gravelly from grief. Silas swallowed hard. His throat was dry, his body exhausted, but there was no room for weakness. Not here. Not in front of them. He scanned the scene. There was no shortage of work to be done, and none of it would bring them back. Rustbrook had survived. Too many hadn't. He clenched his fists, his mind replaying the battle in flashes, screams, the clash of steel, the fire that had swallowed homes. Faces blurred together, some he had saved, many he had not. One face didn't blur. It never did. The deaths bore down on his shoulders, a crushing burden that no amount of planning or foresight could ease. Across the village, children carried buckets of water to douse the last stubborn embers. Women patched fences with scraps of wood, their hands raw from work. Men sharpened weapons, their eyes hollow but determined. No one spoke much. They didn't need to. The war wasn't over, it was merely catching its breath. And next time, it would come back harder. "This isn't over," a voice broke through Silas's thoughts. He turned to see a young woman approaching, her face streaked with dirt and dried blood. Her dark eyes burned with quiet fury, her hands balled into fists. He recognized her now, Imala, the blacksmith's daughter. Her brother, Jace, had fought in the battle. His grave was one of the fresh mounds behind her. "We need to be ready for when they come back," she said, her voice tight but unwavering. "Because they will." Silas met her gaze, taking in the grief that simmered beneath her anger. She wasn't just speaking for herself, she was speaking for every soul lost, for every family shattered. "We will be." It was a lie the moment it left his mouth. He had no idea if that was true. They walked through the village square together, moving past half-collapsed buildings and scorched earth. Life stirred around them in small but meaningful ways, an old woman tending to an injured dog, a youth crafting a crude weapon with fingers too young to understand battle. Marla stopped near a partially collapsed barn, its roof caved in, hay scattered in darkened patches where fire had licked the edges. She turned to Silas, arms crossed over her chest. "What's our next move?" Silas exhaled, scanning the ruin around him. Rustbrook stood, but barely. The defenses had held, but just enough to delay the inevitable. "We rebuild," he said finally. "And we prepare." The words came easy, but in the back of his mind, doubt gnawed at him. He had seen the way the enemy fought, merciless, relentless. And somewhere beyond the tree line, past the graves and the ruins, he could feel eyes watching. Waiting. Silas straightened his shoulders, pushing the unease away. There was no room for doubt. Doubt got people buried. For now, they would honor the dead. And when the enemy returned, they would have to be ready. Rustbrook still stood. That would have to be enough. It wasn't. Silas didn't leave with the others. Not yet. The cemetery had emptied, but the graves remained, raw earth, uneven, too many. He walked between them slowly, reading what names he could. Forcing himself to. Jace. Old Merrin. Tala. Some he remembered. Some he didn't. That was the part that stayed with him. They had fought. They had died. And already, they were being forgotten. That was how it started. Silas stopped at one of the crosses. No name. Just a deep cut in the wood, too rough to be careful, too quick to matter. He stared at it longer than the others. "Who are you?" he said quietly. He had sent him to die, and couldn't even remember his name. The wind moved through the markers, low and hollow. No answer. They had buried him anyway. Because there was no time. Because there were too many. Silas looked out over the rows again. This wasn't survival. This was delay. And next time, there would be more of them. He turned back toward Rustbrook. This time, he didn't look back. Because if he did, he wouldn't leave. Silas pushed open the heavy doors of the town hall. The creak echoed through the dim room. Too loud. Everything felt too loud now. The air smelled of paper, sweat, and ash. Evidence of the flames that had nearly taken the town. Inside, Thomas hunched over a table covered in maps and notes. His fingers traced battle lines in charcoal. Across from him, Elder Miriam sat still, eyes closed, lost in thought. Or prayer. The moment Silas entered, they both looked up. "We need a plan." He moved toward the table, scanning the worn maps. Thomas nodded grimly and pushed a map forward. "We marked where they hit hardest: food, water." His jaw tightened. "They know where it hurts. And they'll hit it again." Elder Miriam opened her eyes, their grey depths carrying the weight of a dozen wars before this one. "We protect what's left," she murmured, "because next time, there won't be much left." Silas ran his finger along the map, stopping at key locations. "We fortify here. Double night watch. Set lookouts on the hills. No blind spots." Thomas leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "That's a start. It won't feed us. We're running low on everything: food, medicine, even wood. A beat. Another week like this and we don't have a village." A frustrated breath escaped Silas. "We send teams out. Nearby settlements. Trade, take what we have to. If anyone's still willing." Elder Miriam dipped her head in measured agreement. "Our past friendships might benefit us now. But hardship transforms folks, Silas. Including former allies." Silas met her gaze. He knew the truth in her words. Hunger made men into thieves. Fear made them worse. "Even so, we have to try," he said. "Or we wait here and starve." Thomas let out a sharp breath. "And if they kill the teams before they make it back?" Silence. A long pause stretched between them before Elder Miriam gave a slow, deliberate nod. "I'll reach out to the Council of Elders. They may listen to me where they wouldn't listen to others." Silas allowed himself a flicker of gratitude. "That might keep us alive," Silas said. "Thank you." The elder woman offered a faint smile, not of hope, but of understanding. Thomas grabbed a scrap of parchment and scrawled a list. "We also need to think beyond survival. Rebuilding defenses isn't enough. Next time, they won't test us. We need sustainability, crops that can grow in harsh conditions, clean water sources that don't rely on fragile wells." "Agreed," Silas said. "We should consult the artisans, the herbalists. See if they can come up with something that gives us an edge." Elder Miriam reached out, placing a hand on Silas's arm. Her touch was light but firm, grounding him in the moment. "Remember," she said quietly, "our strength lies in unity. If fear divides us, we don't survive the next attack." Silas nodded, the weight of responsibility settling deeper into his bones. "We stand together, or we don't stand at all." Thomas glanced between them before giving a final, determined nod. "Then we start now." Because waiting was how people died. As Silas, Thomas, and Elder Miriam stepped out of the town hall, the full weight of Rustbrook's struggle crashed down on them. It hadn't lifted since the battle. It had just been waiting. The village was a patchwork of desperation, walls hastily patched with scrapwood, smoke still curling from the remains of smoldering fires, and the sharp scent of sweat and blood hanging in the air. Villagers moved through the wreckage with grim determination, their faces set in the kind of hardened exhaustion that came from living on the edge of survival. Not relief. Never relief. Some tended to the wounded, others hauled salvaged supplies, and a few worked in silence to reinforce the battered barricades. Yet tension simmered beneath the surface, threatening to boil over. By the water source, heated words erupted, sharp and bitter with resentment. Before Silas could make sense of the situation, one of the villagers emerged from the crowd, thrusting a work-worn hand accusingly toward him. "This is all his fault," the man spat. "Every grave out there is on him." His face was lined with fatigue, but his fury burned bright. "We were peaceful before he showed up." A woman with dirt-streaked cheeks and sunken eyes nodded vigorously. "He brought this war to our doorstep. We were safe before him." Silas stopped in his tracks, the weight of their words pressing down on him like the debris of a collapsing building. For the first time since the battle, the bruises on his body felt dull compared to the wounds in their voices. This was worse. This didn't fade. This followed him. Thomas tensed beside him, his hand instinctively hovering near his belt. Elder Miriam, ever steady, placed a reassuring hand on Silas's arm. "Silas," she murmured, a quiet anchor against the tide of hostility. The man who had spoken first stepped closer, his fists clenched at his sides. His knuckles were raw, whether from labor or battle, it was hard to tell. "What do you have to say for yourself?" His voice was rough, laced with the kind of anger that came from loss. "Why should we trust you now?" Silas held his ground, forcing himself to meet the man's furious glare. He could hear the quiet rustle of movement as more villagers gathered, drawn to the confrontation. Too many. Too close. One of them stepped forward. Not just angry, ready. "I understand your anger," he said, his voice even despite the turmoil building in his chest. "I didn't bring this war here." His voice almost broke. Almost. It was already coming. A sharp scoff cut through the tension. "How convenient." The woman's voice was thick with skepticism, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "You're just trying to save your own skin. Just like the rest of them." Thomas stepped forward then, his voice calm but firm. "He bled for this place," Thomas said. "Same as the rest of us. You think turning on each other saves anyone? It doesn't." Elder Miriam nodded, her presence commanding respect even among the angry crowd. "Blaming each other will not rebuild our homes. It will not fill our food stores. It will not stop the next attack." The man exhaled sharply, his rage flickering like a candle in the wind. He crossed his arms, still glaring, but there was hesitation now, uncertainty creeping into his expression. Silas took a slow step forward. No one moved back. "I'm here because Rustbrook still stands a chance. But only if we stand together. Otherwise, we don't stand at all." Silas stood there a moment longer, his body rigid, the tension slow to leave his muscles. He felt Thomas's steady presence beside him and Elder Miriam's quiet support. Silas nodded once. It wasn't gratitude. It was acknowledgement. Thomas shrugged, his expression unreadable. "We need every hand we can get. Even the reluctant ones. Or we start losing." Elder Miriam squeezed Silas's arm gently before releasing it. "Keep doing what you're doing," she advised. "Time has a way of revealing truth. Even to those who refuse to see it now." Silas watched the villagers disappear into the wreckage of their home. Trust wasn't gone. It was broken. And broken things didn't come back the same. The dim light of the jail flickered weakly, casting long, fractured shadows along the stone walls. Nothing in the room held still for long. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and old blood. Not all of it old. Orianthe sat with an infuriating air of nonchalance, her wrists bound in rough rope, ankles shackled to the leg of the wooden bench. She tilted her head back slightly, studying the ceiling as if her captivity was nothing more than a mild inconvenience. Like she had chosen this. Silas stood before her, his stance rigid. Too rigid. The dim glow from the lantern at his side carved sharp edges into his expression. "Why did you come to Rustbrook?" He already knew she wouldn't answer straight. His voice was low, steady, but laced with a quiet threat. Orianthy's lips curled into a smirk, her emerald eyes gleaming with something between amusement and defiance. She enjoyed this. She exhaled, tilting her head as if the question itself was tedious. "I was curious about your supplies," she said. "And how quickly you'd lose them." "Curious?" Silas's patience thinned. His arms folded across his chest, but his eyes never left hers. "You were seen mapping our defenses. That's not curiosity." Orianthy gave a slow shrug, the movement fluid despite the bindings around her wrists. "I like knowing things." "A beat. It keeps people alive." Thomas, standing off to the side, let out a sharp breath, arms crossed over his chest. His tone was cold. "If you're working with the raiders, now's the time to speak up. Because it won't stay a conversation." Orianthy's gaze flicked toward him, unbothered, before shifting back to Silas. "I have no loyalty to those savages." "That doesn't mean I'm on your side." "Then why not tell us what you know?" Silas pressed, stepping closer. A long pause. Then, ever so slowly, Orianthy's smirk deepened. Instead of answering, she let her eyes roam the room as if taking in every inch of her surroundings for the first time. "You think this place can hold out against another attack?" Her tone was light, almost mocking. Silas's shoulders squared. "It will, if we know what's coming." She let out a soft chuckle, shaking her head. "Ah, but knowledge is power, isn't it?" Thomas's patience snapped. He stepped forward, voice sharp. "Enough riddles. Do you know when they'll strike next?" Orianthy finally leaned forward, the chains at her ankles rattling slightly. Her eyes met Thomas's, and for the first time, her playfulness faded, replaced by something sharper, something calculated. "I might." The room tensed, the air thickening with unsaid words. Silas exchanged a quick glance with Thomas before returning his focus to Orianthy. He could feel it now. They weren't questioning her. She was leading them. And he had let it happen. "Then tell us," he said. He already knew he was asking the wrong question. For a moment, she said nothing. The silence stretched long enough to become unbearable. She let it stretch. On purpose. Then, finally, she exhaled and leaned back against the cold stone wall. "They have plans," she murmured. "A beat. Big ones." Silas didn't flinch. "What kind of plans?" His voice tightened despite himself. Orianthy's smirk returned, but this time, it wasn't just amusement. It was something more dangerous. Plans that erase Rustbrook. A pause. "I knew." She held his gaze. Too steady. Like she already knew where he would break. Thomas shifted beside him, his hands balling into fists, frustration evident in the rigid line of his shoulders. Silas studied Orianthy, watching the way she controlled her breathing, her expressions, her words, always giving just enough but never too much. "You know more than you're letting on," he said finally. She met his gaze, unblinking. "Maybe I do." And she knew exactly how much. Silas let out a slow breath, stepping back. He needed to think. Which meant he had been behind from the start. And all the while, Orianthy watched him. Smiling. Like she wasn't waiting for his decision. Only for him to realize it had already been made. Silas paced the room. Back and forth. Like the thoughts had already taken root. Wouldn't leave him alone. Her words. Still there. Thomas stood by the table, arms crossed. Watching. We're already late. Waiting for him to decide. Elder Miriam sat still. Eyes on Silas. We can't wait. Silas stopped. Rustbrook fortifies. Now. Thomas nodded once. We barely held last time. A beat. We won't survive it again. Not like that. Elder Miriam studied Silas. What's your plan? Silas turned. Sharp. We lock down essentials. Food. Water. Double the watch. Fortify storage. If they can't starve us, if they follow the same pattern, and they will, we hold. If that was still possible. Silence. Then, we rally everyone, Silas said. This isn't defense anymore. It hasn't been for a while. It's survival. Nothing else. Elder Miriam nodded. Slow. Survival won't be enough. Not against something like this. A pause. We need allies. Silas didn't look away. We ask. And hope they answer. But we don't wait for them. Thomas exhaled. Time's already gone. We're just catching up. Elder Miriam straightened. I'll send word. Some will answer. Silas gave a small nod. A gamble. A bad one. No choice. A beat. Then. There's more. Both looked at him. We plan for when this fails. Silence. The wrong kind. Heavy. No one wanted to say it out loud.